Alright, got your mouth hands on, what am I doing? Oh, I don't know what you're doing. I like it. What's up? Yep, pick a spot. Anywhere along the grill.
There's a 0.069% chance of dying. Oh,
Yeah.
0.07 if you round it up.
Yeah. Sum it up. Obviously, as you increase in age, that number increases.
Right.
For your guys' age range,
And that's just grabbing numbers from CDC. Because that's just out of hospitalization. And that was the 2018-2019 influenza season. So I guess 3 years.
That's the flu, though.
Yeah.
Coronavirus thing from 2019.
Yeah.
Alright, let's see who we got here. Internet. Extremely slow today. Alright. Got Ryan. Ethan. Favorite. Okay. Last time I'll see you guys for like a week and a half. Spring break. Don't forget to do your online. You still have online assignments. But yes, last time I'll see you before spring break. Who's going? Anyone going anywhere for spring break? Where are you going?
I'm going to Huron and then I'm sure we're going to Minnesota.
Huron and then to Minnesota.
Yep.
We're at Minnesota.
I don't know. We have to go my stuff. So I guess we're also going.
You're going to Nashville too?
Yeah.
Who else is going to Nashville? There's someone that sits over here. One of my other classes. The whole week. Might bump into another Steven student.
Oh God, no. I'm not low.
Very low odds.
Very low odds that you actually run into it, but there's a chance. Small world. So you're helping her move to Tennessee?
Yeah.
Why'd she move to Tennessee?
Because she's going there for some medical thing.
Is she doing it in Minnesota right now and then just transferring?
No, she's finishing her program. She's like 4 years and she's
Gotcha. Going for like PA or what? RN? Not RN. Yeah, RN.
it's something in like school.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't, PT school. That's the original route I was trying to go.
Why didn't you go that way?
Because I had a kid or two and the closest place to do that's Vermilion. So I would have had to have moved to Vermilion for 2 years and be my wife get back here in France.
That was enough.
What's that?
That was in the program.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with Vermilion, but my wife already had her job. Like, he wanted to settle here in Rapids, where we'd have had to move to Vermilion for 2 years, like my PT school. 3 years actually. That's what my major originally was when I started school.
I think it's
Athletic training. What's up?
I think it's therapy.
Yeah. I think that'd be a great job. But I just else? Who else is going somewhere? Where are you going?
Denver.
Denver? A lot of kids are going to Denver. You might actually run into someone.
Yeah, what is it? Now it's
Might. Might.
they get
You have family down there or what?
get surgery down there.
Surgery? You are?
Yeah,
On?
I think you got an email about it.
I might have.
Yeah.
I don't know. I get so many emails, I lose track. Surgery, huh?
Yeah, good luck now. After 16 years.
Wow. I mean,
Right.
experience.
Oh my god.
Alright. So, yeah, highly doubtful you'll see anyone in Denver though.
Yeah.
You're not going to be traveling out and about.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. Hopefully,
Oh,
it's not
sorry.
too stressful on it.
I believe in our medical system.
Yeah, very good. Who else? We got Minnesota, Tennessee, Denver. Is that it?
I was
Travel?
supposed to go to Denver on Friday.
Why
Why?
did it get canceled?
I don't know.
COVID?
Probably. It's supposed to be in Loveland.
Okay. No one else is traveling for spring break anywhere? We got a cabin. I don't even know where. Somewhere. We rented a cabin. With all of my in-laws. I'm being sarcastic.
Oh, I'm gonna say, never heard of that.
Actually, I like my in-laws. They're not. A lot of people don't. I do like my in-laws. They're nice. They're good people. For the most part. Good things happen with them sometimes.
I feel like you're still being.
No, I'm not. My wife's family's kind of cool.
Yeah.
He's kind of cool. And my barrier, I guess. Any fun stuff in general? You're not traveling. Got things you're gonna do. Things on the agenda. Nothing.
I mean,
You guys gonna basement dwell for a week?
sleeping.
More than a week.
It's supposed to be beautiful out, by the way. I think Tuesday's supposed to be, well, it's what, 70 degrees? Something like that. Get out, enjoy the weather. Alright. We don't have anything else. Tomorrow's last day for late work. If you have late work that's out, you're trying to get that credit for, if you have zeros on assignments, all the way back to day one. You have until tomorrow to turn that in. And after tomorrow, it's turned into zeros. Technically, the quarter ended yesterday. You guys got 2 bonus days to turn late work in. Okay, so tomorrow's the deadline. After tomorrow, they turn into zeros, and that doesn't change. What you have is what you have. Okay. Beyond that, we come back, and then we'll start back to quarter 3. No, quarter 4. Quarter of the year. Yay. Okay, so there's that. And then today, we're going to talk about Napoleon. We did French Revolution. I saw you guys on Tuesday. When we come back from break, we'll start into the Industrial Revolution. And we'll start getting into more modern history, World War I, World War II, things of that nature, Great Depression, all that stuff. And then we'll round out the end of the year there. So the rest of the year will be pretty much 1900 until current. Actually, about 1800 until current. Okay, so we left off on French Revolution. Okay, quick rundown, quick review of French Revolution. This whole thing, how this breaks down, how this all goes haywire, ends up killing 40,000 civilians, and amongst all the other people that they executed as well, royalty and everything else. What's up, David?
When's the latest we can turn the light work in on Friday?
I'll take it until midnight. That'll be the cutoff. Friday at midnight. Tomorrow at midnight. It's the last time you get late work in. So, shut it down. 12:59 is an hour late.
59 minutes late.
59 minutes late. Round to an hour. You have 2 extra days as it is.
Well, I have a
Technically,
lot
I
of
should have cut it off
classes.
on Tuesday, but
I have a lot of classes.
do your homework.
I do, some of it.
Okay. Anyway, hey, French Revolution, right? It goes haywire. We end up killing a lot of innocent people that probably should not have been killed, executed rather. This isn't armies fighting in the field, but we have to understand the way French society was set up before we get into the French Revolution, right? So what are our 3 classes, or what are they called? Go for it, Dave.
What?
Go for it.
The
broken into?
Three Aaron.
Close.
I can't remember the
Estates.
state.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
nobility, the clergy, and the
Okay, then. The nobility, clergy, and the peasants. Okay, you have 3 estates. Remember, King Louis is at the top of all of this. Okay, King Louis is at the very top. He's not part of any estate. He's just the tip of the pyramid. Okay, and then you have the clergy. Right? The Roman Catholic Church still has a lot of power in France. It's a Catholic nation. Okay, so you have the clergy right underneath the king. Below that, you have the nobles, the rich people, the aristocrats. Okay, and then below that, you have the common people. You, gross. Right, the people that Louis and the aristocrats and nobles didn't want to be around. And we're going to hang out Versailles away from you. Picky third estate people. Okay, so there's that. That's the way it's all set up. The third estate obviously does not have the same rights as all the other estates, the other 2 estates. France is broke. France has been broke since Louis XIV. Louis XIV essentially bankrupts France. Louis XV does worse. He loses a bunch of wars. He passes away and hands it to Louis XVI, who is handed an absolute mess. Okay, poor Louis XVI, and he's only like 19 when he takes the crown. So he doesn't know what to do. He's woefully unprepared for walking into this giant mess that his grandpa and his uncle left him. Okay, so he doesn't know what to do. He just kind of leaves it alone. If I leave it alone, it'll fix itself. Obviously, it doesn't happen. So France is on the verge of total economic collapse. Louis brings everyone together, the 3 estates, for the first time in 175 years. Says, we need to figure this out. We have to do this. Okay, first and second estate, I need you guys to start paying taxes. They're going to take a vote on it. The 3 estates take a vote on raising taxes on the first and second estate. Each estate has 1 vote. Are the first and second estates going to cast their vote to raise taxes on themselves? No. So you have a 2v1. Third estate knows that walking into this whole convention. Okay, so third estate jumps next door and says, you know what, you guys aren't going to vote for raising taxes on yourselves. We're going to figure this out. We represent 97% of France. Okay, you schmucks over there can go dilly-dally all you want, but you don't represent any portion of France, really, at all. Okay, so we're going to figure this out as a French population. So they start hashing things out in their own assembly. They call it the National Assembly. And King Louis sees this and says, uh-oh, I've seen this happen before when the people rise up against, their monarchy. I saw it happen in England. This doesn't turn out well for me. We got to figure this out. Okay, so he sends the first and second estate over to join the third estate. Third estate votes them out. They get into a big puffle about how everything's going to happen. Louis sees this all happening and gets scared because he doesn't want to end up like King Charles from England. So he brings in his military. Okay, Louis claims it's to protect himself. The people see it as him bringing in the military to crush their new populist movement, the movement of the people. Okay, so what do they do next? Louis brings in the troops. What do the people do? Not the Sistine Chapel. What do they storm? The Bastille. And Bastille Day. Okay, don't forget what the Bastille is, what Bastille Day is. Okay, this is France's Independence Day. This is the day of no going back. Okay, if we go do this, it's on. Okay, that's just like our 4th of July. Once we sign this declaration and send it to England, there's no going back. There's only one way this goes. It's not going to end up well. But we're going to do it anyway. Right, so they go storm the Bastille. They get all the guns, the gunpowder from there. They tear the Bastille down. They kill all of the royal people, all of the guards in the Bastille. And then it's on. They go down, they march down to Versailles. Who marches down to Versailles?
women.
To go snatch up the king. Specifically, right? Women, but what kind of women? Not just every day. What's up? Dock women, right? These big, stocky, yoked up women go to snatch the king and queen out of Versailles. They do what when they get to Versailles? To the guards.
They put makeup on and
Cuts their heads off, put makeup on them, and march them back to Paris. Okay, Louis knows he's in a bad spot. So what does Louis try to do? Louis tries escaping to Austria. Okay. Oddly enough, much like King Charles, tries escaping north. Okay, in doing so, when he tries to escape, he signs his own death warrant. Okay. Because when kings run away, they don't just run away. Say, okay, for the most part, there's been maybe 1 or 2 kings ever that said, okay, I'm done, I'm not going back. Okay. But in most cases, when kings run away, they raise an army, and they come back and try and crush the rebellion, reclaim the throne. Okay, so when Louis runs away, the people see him as running away to go raise an army. He's a traitor to the country now. And actually, they were trying to work him into the government when they were trying to figure out how to work this new government. They were trying to work the king into it. When Louis runs away, they see it as, okay, well, he's not even going to try. He's just going to try and raise an army to crush us. Okay, so Louis signs a death warrant. They're captured. In the meantime, when they're trying to figure out whether or not to kill Louis and Marie Antoinette, Austria and Prussia declare Austria and Prussia declare war on France. Why? Why would they declare war on France? What do they care? Go for it, Jack.
Cause if France is in trouble, then it would be easier to beat them or something.
They're easier to defeat. Yeah, they're weak. Go for it, Chris.
His wife, Marie Antoinette, sister of Russia.
Yes, Austria. Okay, so Marie Antoinette's brother was the king of Austria. And he sees her in great peril down there in France. All these people are walking around with heads on pikes. My sister's down there. That's not good. What else? What's another reason? Go for it, Xander.
Just like they think that the French like get away with doing stuff like that. Like doing that to the king, they're cool.
Exactly. Okay. If they see France fall, if they see the greatest monarch in Europe at this point fall, okay, they think their own people might try something. Okay, this could become a huge issue for Europe if people rise up in France. All right, so war is declared in Prussia and Austria, push almost all the way to Paris. They don't make it, and ultimately, what happens to Louis and Marie Antoinette? Chopped off. Their heads chopped off by guillotine, right? Okay, and then who's leading this whole French Revolution at this point? Who would be considered the leader of it all? Go for it. Robespierre. Right, Robespierre generally comes out to be the guy kind of leading this whole period of the revolution. Robespierre goes a little bit bloodthirsty, actually a lot bloodthirsty. Made 40,000 civilians killed. I shouldn't say killed. Executed 40,000 civilians executed, most of which are probably innocent. And again, it's very similar to what you saw in the Spanish Inquisition, right? With the Catholic purging out everyone that wasn't Catholic. Right? I don't like my neighbor over there. Been a real pain in my butt for 5-10 years. Real jerk. Hey, guess what? Hey, that guy's a heretic. That guy's a heretic. I don't like him. He's a heretic. I know. Good. We'll burn him at the stake. You see it again in Soviet Russia. Hey, I really like that guy's wife. It'd be really cool if he was out of the picture. Hey, that guy said something bad about Stalin. Good.
Yeah.
Snatch him up in the middle of the night, off the gulag, and you'll never see him again. Okay. Same thing in this time frame. Okay, a lot of people were. That guy's got a lot of land over there. People would use that to snatch up his land. Hey, that guy's a traitor to the cause. Good. Give us his name. We'll have him go visit the guillotine in the morning. Same thing. People got sick of this. Frenchmen, neighbors turning on neighbors. There's so much bloodshed, so many people going to the guillotine. People didn't have the stomach for it anymore. Said, okay, enough is enough. This has gone way out of control. We've killed 40,000 people, plus a bunch of our aristocrats and our king and queen. And we've gone too far. We need to reel this back a bit. What happens to Robespierre? Jack.
Does he get like executed or
He does.
something?
He gets executed by the guillotine. He suffers the same fate that he had issued out to 40,000 other people. Okay, so it turns around on this whole revolution, turns on Robespierre. And in fact, the funny thing about Robespierre, what he did was, they were going up to him and they said, Robespierre, this is enough. We've gone too far. We've killed too many people. And we need to figure out a different path here. And what does Robespierre do? The next morning, he shows up to the assembly and he says, hey, guess what? I have a whole list of a bunch of you people that are traitors to the cause. And he said, okay, Robespierre, we're done. And they all turned on him. Yeah. And then he was threatened to cut all these other people's heads off that were in the National Assembly. So they all turned on him. He's tried the next day, and beyond that, right after that, he's executed. Okay, and that's where we leave off. Okay, that's kind of where we left off on Tuesday. Okay, it's been very bloody. Robespierre is executed, and then we move into this kind of tranquil time, which we didn't cover. So we'll wrap up with the end of the French Revolution here. Technically, Napoleon's considered within the French Revolution. He's considered part of it, but it's also a kind of own era as well. Okay, so it's a blend. It's kind of yes, it's French Revolution, but it's also Napoleonic era. So we'll kind of count that, going to count that separate. 2 pages of notes today is all. I just want you guys to understand how this all wraps up. I don't want to just leave you at Robespierre and then not get the rest of it in here. Not understand how it winds down. So get your notes up real quick. Slide to these 2 pages of notes. What's that? This one and one of them. 2 slides ago. Two slides. Okay, so where we leave off, Robespierre was about 1795. Okay, Robespierre is now gone. The Great Fear, as they called it, with all these people getting their heads cut off. Okay, we're done with that. We're putting that away. Okay, Robespierre did his part, but we need to get away from that. Okay, so we start a new government. This is our 3rd or 4th government in 6 years. They write a new constitution every time. They keep trying to change to make this work. So this is our 3rd or 4th one. Okay, this new government is called the Directory. Okay, much like we have today, much like Montesquieu talked about, they wanted a separation of powers. So they decide on a 2-house legislature, much like we have here, okay, much like the House of Representatives and the Senate, same concept. And then they have a 5-member directory, the same as our executive branch. Very similar to. But instead of having one president, remember they don't like having one person in power anywhere. Okay, so instead of having one person in the executive branch, they decide to have 5. So essentially they have 5 presidents that get together and decide ultimately what their path is going to be. Instead of just one dude making a call. What's up? Yeah. Okay, so again, very similar to what we have set up in America. And remember, America's already been established at this point. So they're kind of, I wouldn't say copying us, but they're trying to figure out their own path here. They do not have a judicial branch. That's what they're missing here. That we do have. Okay, but this directory is a weak government. Okay, it is not strong. And beyond that, it's corrupt. Not that their system was corrupt, but the people that were in government were corrupt. Okay, so you have a very weak, a very corrupt government. Now, even though it is weak and corrupt, they still managed to establish elite schools. Okay, very good schools. They still manage to strengthen the economy. When this whole revolution kicks off, France is on the verge of economic collapse. If not, they're at the precipice. Okay? They're right about to fall over that edge. If not already leaning over or hanging off that edge as it was. But once we get the directory, we're able to strengthen the economy. They start bringing France back economically. Also, able to strengthen the army. Okay, the army's still out there in the field fighting battles against Britain. And they don't do great, but they're not doing terrible either. Okay, they're out there holding their own. Now, this starts to change when we get some good commanders out there in the French fields, i.e. Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, Napoleon was out there scoring some pretty major victories in the battlefield. Okay, he becomes a French hero. So, this directory goes for 4 years. Napoleon sees that the directory is super weak and super corrupt. The people are getting sick of the directory, the French people. They've had enough. Okay, we're trying to get away from corruption. We're trying to set up a decent government here. We just have a bunch of corrupt people in government making money for themselves. These people are lining their pockets with a bunch of French money. Okay, Napoleon sees that it's weak. So he says, all right, I'm just going to go take this over. We're going to figure this out. So, Napoleon goes in there's no revolution. It's a peaceful turnover of power. Okay, peaceful revolution, if you will. If you want to call it that, this government. Okay, but Napoleon walks in and overthrows the directory. France loves it. People of France are pumped. Sweet. We got rid of this old, weak, corrupt government that was garbage, and we now have a French hero at the helm. He doesn't establish himself as emperor right away. Okay, he calls himself head council. So he's essentially like a president or a prime minister. Okay, he's just kind of like the head dude of their government system. French people love it. Yes, sweet. Got a guy who loves France, who loves the Enlightenment, heading up our government now. Now, Napoleon, he lets this go to his head down the road. Okay, he declares himself Emperor of France, at which point he shoots himself in the foot. We just got done with kings and queens. That's what we spent 10 years trying to overthrow. And now Napoleon comes in and down the road calls, now I'm Emperor of France. Okay, France does not like that, not one bit. Okay. So, Napoleon, as brilliant as he is, gets too big for his britches, shoots himself in the foot a dozen different times, and does not end up well. How does Napoleon end up at the end?
Dead.
Well, everyone dies, Mr. Daniel. The only thing in life that is guaranteed.
It's like, small island.
Yes, he gets exiled for the rest of his life. He actually gets exiled twice. He escapes once, and then comes back to France to overthrow the king again. French people love him. Then he loses at Waterloo, and the European leaders say, all right, we're done with Napoleon. Off to a smaller island, farther away, where Napoleon ends up passing away. Okay, and then where does France go after that? After Napoleon's ousted, he's put in exile 1,500 miles from any kind of land. Where does France go to for government? What are the monarchs win? Okay, the monarchs of Europe defeat France. What do you think they put back in? Go for it, Jack.
Monarch.
Monarchy, Louis XVIII. Okay, so you have the English Civil War, where we chop the king's head off, and then we go to a parliamentary system. Cromwell takes over. Don't like Cromwell, so we go back to monarchy. French Revolution. Fight 10 years. Revolution. Napoleon comes around, Napoleon leaves, and we end up back with a monarchy 10 years later. Okay, so we go full circle again. Louis XVIII takes over. Now, Louis XVIII does not have the same powers that the previous Louis did. He does have to answer to a government system now, okay, but he is still the king of France. So, some effects of this revolution very quickly. Dislodge that old social order. No longer is this three-estate system around. We're getting rid of that. See you later. I don't care if you're rich or if you're part of the church or if you are the poorest of peasants. We are all equal Frenchmen. We have equal rights. They overthrew the monarchy, obviously, but that was huge for Europe. If you bring the church under state control, in church, you are no longer the second in command in France. You're not going to have any power in the government. Beyond that, we're going to regulate you so you're not having power. French people gain a strong sense of nationalism. Okay, no longer are they subjects of the king. No longer are they in this feudal system. Okay? We are all equal French people, rich, poor, anywhere in between. We're French. This is our country now. We don't live under some one person. We're not the subjects of this one person. This is our country, our government. This is France. Okay? So they're very, very proud of their country and what they've accomplished. Okay, they begin religious tolerance in France. Remember, France was Catholic prior to this whole revolution. Okay, coming out of it, doesn't matter. Okay? Those Enlightenment ideas, you have the freedom of religion. They set up state schools to replace religious ones. Okay, again, the Roman Catholic Church was the one running the school system prior to the revolution. We all know how that turns out. Or how that all was, rather, prior to this. Okay, they organized systems to help the poor. They organized systems to help wounded war veterans from the revolution, whether it be fighting within France or fighting on the fields of battle with Prussia, Austria, or England. They organized systems to help widows, the wives left behind when the husbands were killed out on the field of battle. And prior to this, they didn't have any of that. The king did not care. Right? Be poor. I don't care. eat bread with sawdust in it. I don't care. I'm still going to throw my lavish parties. I don't need to help you guys. You guys are my subjects. Okay, now that we're all equal people of France, we should probably help our poor people out. Okay, so that's a revolutionary idea here in France. Okay, last but not least, France abolishes slavery in the Caribbean. There's an uprising in the Caribbean, and the French people think, you know what, they're right. We shouldn't have slaves down there in the Caribbean. We are all equal men. We should not have slaves down there. Okay, Napoleon frees the serfs. When he gets in, obviously part of the revolution, but not necessarily. But Napoleon does a lot. He builds on a lot of this as well. Okay? He builds some really, really good schools for all kids. Again, abolishes serfdom. No more serfs. You can't be indentured servants to the land. So, pretty radical changes that happen here. Now, when King Louis the 16th or 18th rather takes over, he starts going right back to where they started. Okay, he starts, he puts serfdom back in, and you start seeing this old order come right back to France. People don't like it, and that's why you'll see when Napoleon marches, when he escapes his first exile and marches on France, the people are like, yes, the revolution's back. We finally have these enlightenment ideas coming back. We're getting away from Louis XVIII, who's going straight back to what the monarchy was. Okay, so France welcomes him with open arms when he escapes his first bout of isolation out there. Anyone still writing this? Okay. Oh, Napoleon. I'm not going to go over this. This will all be covered. Okay. What's that?
He lost the country.
Well, he won a ton of battles. Where he messed up was A, going to Russia, and B, at Waterloo, he got too big for his britches. Okay, so, hopefully you guys have a little notes. If you missed anything, like I said, first two slides, where did my thing go here? There we go. First two slides right there, revolution effects. The next part here, you have a full biography. You can pick up this worksheet right here, and we're just going to go through the life of Napoleon. This does a really good job of really detailing out Napoleon's life. So we will watch this. You guys can follow along and fill out your worksheet there. Easy day today. What's going on back there? You're wigging out? Oh. Anyone still pulling up that worksheet? Okay, after. This does go in order. People get confused about the divorce question. I think it's number 4. Is that the one about divorce? Or number 8? Which one's the one about divorce? 8. Okay. People were freaking out yesterday. How is this jumping from 1 to 4 to 8? Okay. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, it doesn't jump. Okay, they talk about divorce.
Sounds like
Louis and his wife almost divorced at one point. So when they start talking about divorce the first time, don't freak out and jump down to number 8. Okay, that's spoiler alert, they don't get divorced the first time around. Alright, so without further ado, here we go with Mr. Napoleon.
For a brief period of time, Napoleon seemed to be all things to all people. Perhaps the greatest military commander ever, was also a preeminent head of state. With his brilliant mind and amazing leadership abilities, he made France soar, taking it to unprecedented heights of glory. He also brought it to its knees when his genius and his ego spiraled out of control. Nearly 2 centuries later, the impact of his actions still reverberates around the globe. story started on Corsica, a small Mediterranean island located off the coast of France. The Bonapartes lived in the port city of Ajaccio. His father, Carlo, was a prominent attorney and a descendant of Italian nobility. His mother, Letitia, also of noble birth, was considered by some to be one of the most attractive women on the island. On August 15, 1769, she was attending church services in this cathedral when she went into labor. The family estate was only minutes away, so she decided to make her way home. When she reached the house, she could not climb the stairs to her bedroom, but instead gave birth to Napoleon on this sofa in a downstairs sitting room. From birth, she instilled in him a feeling of being special.
She was a very determined woman. She was a great realist. Napoleon had a very good sense of his own importance. I think his mother gave him that. His mother, although being a realist, was always one that thought her children could do anything.
Although of noble birth, the Bonapartes weren't wealthy. They lived in a fine house and had a high profile in the community. But money was tight. They brought their children up with a set of beliefs that were close to the earth, very Corsican in nature.
He certainly had pride and a belief in family. He had a sense of honor, and these are things that are often attributed to Corsicans.
If ever an island could give birth to a warrior, Corsica was it. For centuries, Corsican battled a way of life. The year Napoleon was born, the island was engulfed in war as the Corsicans fought with France for independence. As a boy, Napoleon was charismatic, generous, yet he was often in fights. There was nothing unusual about this, though, for the Corsican view of manhood encouraged it. Pride, revenge, and honor walked hand in hand here. At the age of 9, Napoleon received a scholarship to go to France and study at the Brienne Military Academy. The thought of being a soldier seemed to fascinate him. Whenever his mother had given white bread for school back on Corsica, he exchanged it with soldiers at the nearby fort for army rations, claiming he had to get used to them sooner or later. Almost from the beginning at Brienne, his leadership abilities were noticed.
The man is immediately going to show great promise as a soldier. He is going to organize the fellow boys in snowball fights. He is immediately the man in charge. Smaller than the others, he is still the pluckiest and takes charge of them and organizing their games whenever he can.
Yet he was always the outsider. Brienne was a school that attracted boys from the finest families in France. As a Corsican, Napoleon was looked down on as a second-class Frenchman. This seems to have fueled his need to achieve.
He had to win everything he did. It was part of his makeup as a boy, and it was one of the reasons for success as a commander. Probably wasn't popular or easy to get along with.
Although his grades weren't perfect, even at this young age, he was beginning to show signs of extraordinary intelligence.
Napoleon probably was a genius. He had an amazing brain capacity. Along with his study of things military, he picked up along the way politics and philosophy, and his brain just sucked all this up like a sponge. And it was as if he had a computer in there that he could just draw on for anything that he needed. It was like going to a great library and just picking a book out.
Now 15 years old, Napoleon next moved to Paris in 1784. He continued his education here at one of France's foremost military academies, prestigious École Militaire. Almost from the beginning, people commented on his enormous ambition.
If you looked at him, you could tell that there was someone who was determined, who had a fire in his eye. And when he talked to you, he looked you right in the face, and he wasn't afraid to talk to you, even though he came from a poor background.
He seemed already to be formulating a vision of greatness for himself, a vision where someday he would play a major role on the stage. Voraciously, he studied the lives of great men like Alexander the Great. The other thing he studied obsessively was firepower. He became a brilliant artilleryman. Instinctively, the proper use of artillery would allow him to dominate any situation. He was so focused and proficient at his studies that he passed through the 2-year program in one, becoming an officer at the age of 16 years, 15 days. Napoleon soared to glory against the turmoil of the French Revolution. This was a time when a man could be rapidly promoted, and Napoleon's rise was meteoric. He believed in a French republic and fought against royalists who wanted to restore the recently fallen monarchy. France was not only at war with itself, but also was battling other European powers on its borders who wanted to see the old monarchy reinstated. Napoleon received his first real taste of glory in 1793 at the French seaport of Toulon. He masterminded a brilliant attack against the pro-royalist British fleet anchored there. Against all odds, his troops drove the British from a fort and their fleet from the harbor. He led many of the charges himself. He seemed almost fearless. He was a firm believer in by example. By taking the greatest risks himself, how could any of his men refuse him? His accomplishment here was so astounding, he was made brigadier general at the age of 24. Yet France remained in total chaos. Its political climate was changing so rapidly that a hero one day could become a criminal the next day, when another side gained favor. Napoleon was caught front and center in this maelstrom. Less than a year after Toulon, he was jailed briefly by political enemies, and then spent a desolate period in Paris without a command. At one point, his fortunes fell so low that he even contemplated suicide. In 1795, he was pulled out of this tailspin when he was called in to protect the National Convention from mobs of angry royalist supporters. Firing his cannons in the streets of Paris, he drove the royalists out, and in some people's eyes, saved the revolution. This was exactly the epic accomplishment that was needed to start him on his way to the most fabled career in military history. For in return for his success, he was now given command of the French army in Italy. At the same time, he met an astonishing woman who changed his life forever, Josephine. The love affair between Napoleon and Josephine de Beauharnais is one of the most famous romances in history, yet no one would describe it as a fairy tale. Josephine was a beautiful young woman who was a member of Parisian high society. She had lost her husband in the revolution. Ambitious, intelligent, and calculating, she knew what she wanted and how to get it. Napoleon almost instantly fell in love with Josephine and pursued her with the same determination with which he went into battle. For her part, although she found him attractive, it seemed she looked on the relationship in a very businesslike way.
She was getting older. She'd been having a lot of affairs with very prominent people in Parisian society, but affairs don't always equal marriage, and she wasn't sure what her prospects would be. She wasn't sure that this army officer would amount for much, but she decided in the end that it would probably be a good match for her and her children.
After a courtship of less than a year, they were married on March 9, 1796. Napoleon would one day become the most powerful man on earth, yet he would never be able to completely control Josephine. Just days after their wedding, Bonaparte left to take command of his troops in Italy. France was battling there with other European powers who still wanted it to restore its monarchy. Foremost amongst these foes, Austria and Piedmont. It would take a miracle for him to succeed there. His army was a ragtag group of ill-fed, underpaid, poorly equipped, and understaffed men. Yet his confidence was so high that none of this seemed to bother him. He simply went to work. The thought of losing seemed never to occur to him.
Napoleon had great belief in himself and his own ability. In Italy, he used this, and he used every shot in his arsenal of man management, cajoling, persuading, being extremely friendly with people, being very harsh with people, screaming at them, whatever it took to get the men to follow him. And this magic worked. It was what we would call today perhaps star quality.
As a lifelong student of warfare, Napoleon used the Italian campaigns for his own theories of battles to work. In the process, revolutionized the army.
It's like nobody has seen before. Before war had been a gentleman's game. Two armies line up on a field and they pound away at each other until one side gives. Not Napoleon. He's not going to take it while the other side's giving it. He's going to force it all upon the enemy. He divides their forces, crushes one wing, and then goes after the other.
Slowly but surely, a miracle began to happen. The French started to turn defeat into victory, and then victory into conquest. Leading many of the charges himself, a myth of invincibility began to grow around Bonaparte.
He had led the attack from the front, bullets whizzing by left and right, all kinds of men falling killed and wounded on all sides of him. He is untouched, unscathed. He feels at the end of this that he has been touched by a superior being, that something great awaits him. And maybe it's the conquering of Europe, but not the world.
In less than a year, he accomplished the impossible. Starting almost from scratch, he defeated 4 armies, each larger than his own. Yet he was not the conquering hero in his private life. Obsessively in love with his wife, he was troubled by her lack of response to the letters he sent home. He didn't know that back in Paris, Josephine was having numerous affairs. Next, he returned to France, now one of the country's greatest heroes. Many felt if he could work miracles in Italy, he could also work them against France's mortal enemy, England. The place he chose to confront the British was unexpected and exotic: Egypt. Napoleon felt if he could conquer Egypt, it would help disrupt England's trade routes with the Middle East and India. A soldier of fortune at heart, he knew there could be no greater or more exotic battle arena than this ancient land. The scholar in him was already aware of the fate of the country's past. For thousands of years, it had been the greatest civilization on earth. In July of 1798, he landed in Egypt and then quickly to Alexandria. Then, the spectacular Battle of the Pyramids near Cairo destroyed additional Egyptian forces. Although this was clearly a military expedition, for Napoleon it was also an intellectual challenge. His curiosity and reverence for the land was all-consuming.
He also understood that there were things in Egypt that the French could learn. He took a whole cadre of scientists along with him. The idea was to try to understand Egyptian science, try to understand Egyptian history. They went and looked at the pyramids. They discovered the Rosetta Stone.
The excitement of these fabulous discoveries was soon dampened, though, by word from Europe. Napoleon learned that a new coalition of Austria, Britain, and Russia formed against France. He decided to return to Paris. At the same time, he received word of Josephine's infidelities. The news devastated him. In a letter full of self-pity and heartache, he poured out his emotions to his brother Joseph. His rocky marriage next went from heartbreak to humiliation. When Britain's Admiral Nelson intercepted the letter at sea, it was published in London newspapers, and Napoleon became the laughing stock of Europe. Heartsick, returned to France, determined to divorce Josephine. Threatened with the breakup of her marriage, Josephine now realized how important it was to her. She pleaded with him for another chance. At first, he refused to forgive her, but the thought of losing contact with her children, he now loved as his own, caused him to give the relationship another try. At the same time, an enormous opportunity came his way. The French people were losing faith in their government. After over 10 years of revolution and civil upheaval, they longed for a strong leader, someone to calm the waters. Napoleon had performed miracles on the battlefield. Perhaps he could deliver them also in government. The people were looking for a saber that would cut them free of the turmoil. He was the obvious one to wield it. Forming key political alliances and with the threat of force, he seized control of the government in a bloodless coup on November 9, 1799, becoming the first consul of France, a post that carried with it almost dictatorial powers. Now Napoleon set about making France into something new, something that would cause the whole world to take notice. Government was an arena where he could let his ideas become reality. He was obsessed with living up to this challenge, and he succeeded spectacularly. He instigated a new code of laws, abolished serfdom, encouraged religious toleration, and made education a top priority.
It adds a dimension to Napoleon that makes him greater than just a general, makes him greater than just a conqueror. This is a man who understands the civilian side, the peaceful side of life, and is attempting to mold it in what he believes is right.
He seemed to have more energy than other men. At the Fontainebleau Palace, he had his desk moved into his bedroom so he could get up in the middle of the night and work. Even while taking a bath, he would be reading and thinking. To those around him, he was both inspiring and exasperating.
People adored Napoleon and despised him. And even people that adored him sometimes despised him because of his incredible work habits, his ability to be both cold and friendly at the same time. He was not a simple personality. He was very complex.
For many, Napoleon became a hero. Even men like Beethoven looked up to him. France was soon the envy of the world. Everything seemed to be working for him, even his marriage. Josephine seemed born for her role as the most visible woman in France. Her taste was impeccable, and she had an enormous influence on French society. The couple lived a whirlwind lifestyle, yet did manage to find some quiet hours at their country estate of Malmaison.
Malmaison was Josephine's prize project. She redecorated it and spared no amount of cost. Whatever it took, she was willing to spend to redecorate it. It was a country home. It was a manor. It was a place where people could go and relax, and that was precisely what it was designed to be.
The only room that truly seemed to be Napoleon's was his study. He spent a lot of time here rethinking France and Europe. Then it was off to Paris to put his plans into action. But although he was head of state, he never really ceased to be a soldier. His actions were extremely paradoxical. He would play the Prince of Peace, but at the same time be the god of war. Always in the name of peace, always in the name of the revolution, his troops marched out and dominated Europe. With the support of bayonets and cannons, he was determined to enlighten his nations to his progressive policies. Soon, most of Europe was under his control. Napoleon knew better than most the lure of glory, and he offered it as a prize for all of France.
Napoleon was leading them to glory. He actually used this term a lot. The problem with glory, particularly military glory, is that it's like riding a tiger. Can't get off.
But if the French public were susceptible to the lure of glory, no individual was more in danger of falling prey to its temptations than Napoleon himself. He may have been a genius, a man of epic accomplishments, still a man. His insatiable appetite for glory and power would be his downfall. so far, so fast. By 1804, he seemed to have it all. That wasn't enough. On December 2nd of that year, at Notre Dame Cathedral, in an effort to consolidate even more power, he became Emperor of France. For centuries, imperial coronations had been presided over by the Pope, but at his coronation, Napoleon took the crown himself and placed it on his own head. Although the French people and the Senate had approved this change in his status, to many it seemed a betrayal. Hadn't the revolution been fought in part to overthrow a monarchy? And now he was bringing in another. Many believe this coronation was a major turning point. Napoleon's move from hero to common man to royalty was an ominous sign of things to come. Bonaparte had overreached himself, and his ambition would be his undoing. Now, even more, his armies marched out across Europe.
Securing under French control Italy and the Germanies, Napoleon brings those precepts and freedoms of the French Revolution to the people, but at the same time he brings his garrisons of troops. And as the years go by, those become harder and harder to bear. Tribute must be paid for their upkeep. Napoleon doesn't do anything for free. And so as the years go by, that becomes a heavy price to pay. And so many of these nations then are going to be willing, when the time is right, to join forces to overthrow French yoke.
His French Empire now was the greatest in Europe since the Roman Empire. By 1809, Napoleon became obsessed that he had no blood heirs to inherit his throne. Josephine seemed incapable of having any more children. The matter became of such importance to him, he decided to ask her for a divorce.
I think that there was grief in two sides to it, particularly on her side. She did not want this divorce. She knew that she couldn't give the one honest thing that he had asked her for more than anything else was a child. It was a divorce that she was forced to accept. And it was in many ways, he was cutting himself off from his oldest confidant.
It was a great shock to her. They'd been together for 14 years. She pleaded with him to rethink the decision, but he was firm. On December 15, 1809, she passed out of his life, turning alone to Malmaison. He replaced her with the Archduchess of Austria, Marie Louise. In 1811, Marie Louise gave birth to a son, also named Napoleon, was given the title King of Rome. The coronation, his divorce, and the military subjection of his neighbors were all indications that his genius was slipping into megalomania.
One of the flaws in men of genius is that they began to think of themselves as a special race of humans who don't have to deal with these ordinary humans who get in the way of doing things, who are waffle here and there, who are never steadfast, who seem to have second-rate minds. So Napoleon is now diminishing everyone around him. And in that process, you have this superego. It is the ego of a genius. Again, the words of the great Lord Acton many decades later, power does corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It seems nothing could stop Napoleon. Foreign armies fell to his sword. Loved ones were replaced, but lost their usefulness. Could outwit and outfight anyone who stood in his way. The only person who could possibly defeat Napoleon was Napoleon. His real undoing started with a cancerous mistake known as the Continental System. This involved the ever-present rivalry and hatred between France and Great Britain. Britain was the one nation more than any other that had continued to successfully defy him. For although he controlled much of the land mass of Europe, British controlled the seas. Empire, military muscle, they challenged him every step of the way. In an effort to paralyze their economy, he introduced the Continental System. This barred British ships from all ports under French control, and also barred neutral nations from carrying British goods to the continent. He had grown accustomed to being right so much of the time that he failed to realize the magnitude of this blunder. For the continental system paralyzed not only Britain's economy, but all of his European neighbors as well. Immediately, blockade running and smuggling became a way of life in Europe, as everyone tried to maneuver around Napoleon. Fortunes were won and lost daily in this high-stakes game. With so much money on the line, allies soon became foes. Finally, war broke out, as Portugal and Spain joined forces with Britain in an attempt to divide him. For over a decade, he had hardly put a foot wrong, but now a series of mistakes led to death's door.
He is going to stumble. He is going to fall across that sword of nationalism which will rise up in Spain and elsewhere and come to destroy his empire.
Britain brought in the brilliant Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, to lead the troops against France on the Iberian Peninsula. Napoleon, preoccupied with running his empire in Paris, never fought Wellington in Spain, but instead left that task to his marshals. This was another blunder, for the cagey Wellington got the best of the French at almost every turn without hope. Bonaparte further compounded his miseries when he made the catastrophic mistake of invading Russia in 1812. It was here the fates really began to desert him. The Russians took a page from his war manual and decided not to play by the rules. Instead, they lured his army into their vast expanse of lands and then let the brutal Russian winter close in. He tried to retreat back to Europe, but was engulfed by cold, snow, starvation, and rotting Cossack warriors. Of the 600,000 men he had come with, 500,000 died, deserted, or were captured. Back in Europe, he met with more disaster. At the Battle of Leipzig in October of 1813, his enemies tore into his army, put him on the run back to Paris. Napoleon had never known this magnitude of failure before. Now, all of a sudden, it's a daily companion. With Allied troops converging on Paris, he retreated to Fontainebleau Palace, contemplated a warrior's way out of his defeats.
In 1812, Napoleon had a potion made up of poison in case the worst possible fate befell him. And generally the worst possible fate did befall him. So he goes now to this old poison, and he takes it. What has happened? The poison has lost its potency, and instead he's just violently sick, but lives.
His only recourse now was to abdicate the throne and place himself at the mercy of his enemies. On April 11, 1814, he stepped down as leader of France and was immediately replaced by King Louis XVIII. The French Revolution had now come full circle, with a king of the Bourbon family back in power. Here at Fontainebleau, Napoleon made a tearful farewell to his troops, and then set off for exile on the island of Elba, a remote corner of the Mediterranean Sea. Yet he still had some fight left in him. Legend has it he said he would return to France when the violets bloomed. Once he got to Elba, he wasn't so sure. His bravado vanished when he arrived. Located off the coast of Italy, the island was a tiny, lion-infested, poverty-stricken piece of rock just 18 miles long and 12 miles wide. If his European enemies had their way, Napoleon would be isolated here forever. The terms of his exile allowed him to keep 1,000 men under his command and maintain control of the island's economy. Yet this autonomy was mostly ceremonial, for he was constantly under the scrutiny of a British commissioner. Few men have fallen further in such a short time. There was one ray of good news for him, though. Back in France, the reign of Louis XVIII soon proved to be a failure. The French people had grown accustomed to the reforms of the revolution Napoleon had put in place. Under Louis, many of these reforms were being repealed. The clock seemed to be spinning backwards towards a pre-revolutionary state, Old hatreds were revived, conspiracies hatched, and resistance organized. Napoleon felt that he could get back to Paris, he may be able to exploit the situation. Less than a year after being exiled on Elba, he saw his chance to escape come when the British commissioner went on a brief trip to Italy. With his band of 1,000 men, he had commandeered 7 small ships and set sail for France. True to his word, violets were blooming again. In many ways, this adventure seemed like a throwback to his early days. He was living like a soldier of fortune again. Still, he had many doubts about his acceptance back in France and his ability to confront Louis. He landed on the coast of France on March 1st, 1815, and immediately started marching towards Paris. The route he chose was through the Alps. This would allow him to sidestep Provence, which he believed to have royalist sentiments. What happened on this march almost defies description. If the fates had deserted Napoleon in Russia, it appears they had now returned to bless him on the great moments in history. Even on his most egotistical day, he couldn't have conjured up the events that were about to happen. It was spring in the Alps as Napoleon marched towards Paris. All along his path, jubilant people began to turn up. Soon men started volunteering to march with him.
It's nostalgia in the countryside. It's the France of the Tricolor, the France of the Massier. It's the France marching again for liberty, equality, and fraternity.
In Paris, Louis was stunned to hear that Bonaparte had returned. Thought at first Napoleon had gone mad. Nevertheless, he sent troops out to confront him. Yet Napoleon was rapidly gaining momentum. As he climbed higher and higher into the mountains, more soldiers volunteered. Deep in the Alps, on the roof of Europe, he finally met the first troops Louis had set out to stop him. In a scene worthy of Shakespeare, he now delivered the greatest performance of his life. Unarmed, he walked out in front of the king's army and addressed them.
Soldiers who were sent to oppose him cannot withstand his personality. He stands in front of them alone, exposes his breast and says, "If you will shoot your emperor, go ahead." None of them do. No one even thinks about it. They swarm to his colors. His numbers grow. Anyone sent to oppose him falls under his sway.
He continued on towards Paris. Louis sent more troops, and these great armies also fell under the spell of Bonaparte's magic. Louis wisely gave in to the inevitable, led the victory in the middle of the night. On March 20th, Napoleon marched into Paris. Once again, he entered France. In the streets, jubilant crowds mobbed him. To some, it was as if he had returned from the dead. A miracle had accomplished. He had recaptured the entire country without a drop of French blood being spilled. Immediately upon his return, he made gestures of peace to his European neighbors. They didn't believe it. All over Europe, the call went out for an allied army of 1 million men to march on France and eliminate Napoleon Bonaparte forever. This made Napoleon's next course of action clear. His only hope was to raise his own army faster than they and score a decisive victory before they could get organized. Luck was still with him. In less than 3 months, he performed the miracle of raising a standing army while the Allies were still getting organized. Since returning from Elba, he spent almost every waking hour preparing for the clash that would pit France against the world. One of the few things he did of a personal nature was to return to Malmaison. While he was on Elba, Josephine died of diphtheria. Napoleon walked the grounds and retired to her bedroom. He sat alone, remembering. Then it was off to war. Napoleon's spies reported that in next-door Belgium, armies of Britain, Prussia, and Belgium were gathering for the forthcoming invasion of France. This was his chance. If he could decisively defeat these major powers, it might cause the rest of Europe to rethink their invasion plans. would have to act immediately before they could gain any strength. With lightning speed, his troops marched into Belgium where it proved secrecy and darkness. The British army in Belgium was 100,000 strong, and the Prussian army 110,000. Combined, they could easily defeat Napoleon's 125,000 troops. But at the time, the two Allied armies were divided by dozens of miles. Bonaparte felt confident he could attack one army and defeat it, then swing around and defeat the second army separately. June 16th, his troops attacked and all the Russians. On June 17th, he turned his attention to the British, brought to the command Wellington. Cautious Wellington did not want to fight the French without Prussian support, so he began withdrawing from the area. Napoleon and his army headed off after them. Had the French caught the British on the 17th, it's likely they would have defeated them. But a great stroke of luck came Wellington's way. The heavens opened up in one of the most famous rainstorms. Downpouring, it rendered all roads impassable in mud. Forced the battle for 18. More important, bought Wellington time to get back to the ground he thought he could stand on. The battlefield he had in mind was near a town called Waterloo. On the morning of the 18th, Napoleon confidently rode out onto the battlefield. In his own mind, and in the eyes of his troops, he was still the greatest commander since Alexander the Great, perhaps even greater. He told his officers he expected the battle to be a picnic. Napoleon's confidence and feeling of invincibility was born of the fact that he thought the Prussians were totally out of the picture, and that the British would be the only foe for the day. He was unaware that the Prussians had regrouped 10 miles away and were now marching towards the battlefield. Once the confrontation began, he realized he had severely misjudged Wellington and the British. Wellington had never lost a major campaign. Here at Waterloo, Napoleon for the first time had a military genius of his own caliber. Over the years, Wellington had obsessively studied Napoleonic warfare. Like some great chess master, he accurately predicted almost every move Napoleon was going to make. The units of French watched to divide his troops and conquer them. Time was getting tighter, for he now learned that the Prussians were nearing the battlefield. If they joined with the British, there would be no way he could beat their combined armies. In an effort to somehow dispose of the British faster, brought forth his undefeated Imperial Guard. This was his last chance.
The Imperial Guard, especially the Old Guard, are men who have served extremely valiantly. They've all won awards for valor in their previous fights. They've never been defeated. On every battlefield when Napoleon's had to administer the coup de grace, it's the Old Guard that's done it for him.
At 7 p.m., he led the Guard out himself for a last stand.
He led them in person until his staff persuaded him that no, he must not put himself in jeopardy, that even if they won the battle, if he were killed, then everything they'd been fighting for would be at an end.
So Napoleon turned them over to his field commander. They marched forward towards the British. The future of France was on the line here, and the fate of Europe the next 100. Wellington had cleverly become part of his army behind the reverse slope of the hill. He took a place there along with them. Mighty French Imperial Guard marched right towards them. The Guard got in range. Wellington gave the order to stand and fire.
The Guard can't take the pounding. Initially, they moved forward, men stepped forward in ranks. The discipline is incredible. These are Napoleon's best troops, but the pounding is just too much.
Immediately panicked, ranks of all the other French soldiers in the field. Morale collapsed. Entire army began to escape. This was followed by a British infantry charge. Napoleon's magic touch finally disappeared. Outgunned, outgeneraled, the French broke ranks and ran. At the same time, the Prussian army arrived and flooded the field. Napoleon realized it was hopeless. Under the protection of the Guard, he abandoned the battle and headed back to Paris. On June 22nd, 1815, Napoleon abdicated the throne again. He was banished to the tiny island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. He spent 6 desperate, desolate years here. His death, 1821. According to in 1840, the body of Barton Carroll St. as France's greatest hero, is buried today in the setting of spectacular Church of the Dome, Hotel des Alpes. His most controversial figure during his life, death slipped into.
There we go. There's the legend of Napoleon. Okay. Again, Napoleon comes from pretty much nothing, becoming a powerful man in Europe. A very brilliant man. Not just militarily. He loved the ideas of the Enlightenment. Always up thinking, pondering what's next. Always reading. He wore people out because he was always trying to be, always studying, trying to make himself better. Rises to power, does really well. What happens to poor Napoleon when his letter's intercepted? Go for it. Put it in the public newspaper, okay? Napoleon finds out his wife has been cheating on him this whole time while he's out conquering lands and fighting battles. Okay, so he writes a letter to his brother. You know, he's heartbroken. He's whining and crying in this letter. I mean, quite literally. I mean, they've been married for, 14 years? Or no, at that point it had been about 10. Okay, but still. Okay, and so this letter pouring out his heart, this leader of France gets intercepted by Horatio Nelson. Okay, Horatio Nelson's like, look at this. This is hilarious. I have Napoleon's whole journal about his heartbreak here. He prints it to all of Europe. And so Napoleon is massively embarrassed by that. Horatio Nelson, if you don't know who that is, he's a one-eyed, actually, he has one eye that works. He's a one-armed guy. He was a very famous, one of the most famous naval captains in the British Navy. If you want to look into that guy, he does some crazy stuff. But yeah, he has one eye that gets decimated in a battle. I can't remember what battle. And then he loses an arm in a battle. And at one point, he's charging into battle, and his captain's trying to pull him off. In those days, the only way to send messages was flags, right? You can't just, hey, stop doing that over the radio. So his captain's trying to pull him back in, and they're like, sir, the captain's telling you to come back. And he takes his telescope, and he puts it up to his bad eye. He's like, I don't see any signal. Crazy dude. He ends up dying later down the road by a sniper bullet. But Horatio Nelson, if you look into that guy, cool story there. Anyway, back to Napoleon. Again, declares himself the Emperor of France. Kind of starts going down the wrong road. Right? He's very smart, brilliant guy. But he gets too big for his britches. Declares himself the Emperor of France. He loses his first battles in Russia. His army's decimated. He's exiled. Comes back. They make them King Louis, 18th king, and Napoleon escapes. Goes back to France. Goes back to Paris. Imagine being King Louis the 18th, sent armies down, fight Napoleon, and your armies just dissolve. Where do they all go? Napoleon marches out in front of them. These armies that are supposed to be fighting him. These armies that are supposed to be capturing him. He marches out in front of them all by himself. He says, I'm your emperor. I'm here to overthrow the king. And they say, yeah. And all of Louis's armies are just joining Napoleon this whole time. They're not even fighting him, not even one single shot. Okay, so they want to go back to that thought of the revolution, getting out from under the king. Unfortunately, again, he gets too big for his britches at Waterloo. He says, you know, this next fight's going to be a picnic. I'm not even worried about it. And he gets his punch handed to him. Right? He gets his teeth kicked in, and that's essentially the end of old Napoleon. And they say this is the Battle of Waterloo determined either the future of France or Europe for the next 100 years. And that's what happened. Okay, the monarchs of France or Europe win, and they go back to a monarchy for the next 100 years. So there's that. That's what they're talking about in that point. So last thing you have to do for the next 15 minutes is where are we at here? I think you have 6 questions to answer out of the book. After that, you're done. That's it. All you got for the day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 questions. That's it. So off you guys go. Be able to finish this 15 minutes pretty easily. You can work with partners if you want. Music if you want. What's up? All these stuff. Sure, that's what Jack's asking for. He asked me like 20 minutes ago. So after he gets back. Oh. Yep. Yeah, after I both of you have securities. What's crazy about that?
Wait, what's that?
Letting people out in the parking lot. Wait, you're a junior though, right? You're a senior year. Yeah, I'm running a bachelor's. Last time I had someone do that, it sent the person back to come get a pass off of the door. Not even joke.
Well, it's not what security guard, it's making sure it's secure. And then one of my the short one?
Ooh.
The short little one? He's so rude. He literally grabbed my back. No, Nikki did. He grabbed her back.
Oh, Eugene? Eugene?
You're coming. Don't excuse you, sir. I want to ask that was not my fault. You could have given him that. No, you don't have to. Oh, Carlos.
So they don't send you back and say where you want to find.
Okay.
What are we doing?
What do you mean?
Why are we way over there?
You guys are working on it.
What's that?
We're working on it.
Okay, we work on it. I say we're partners, that's good. We're not doing it. I was fascinated by those old days. No health regulation, no safety regulation.
And a lot of kids go to school because and management stuff like that.
Didn't have any child labor law.
And
Start working in the factories at like 6, 7, 8, or 9. A lot of the time, kids aren't old enough to really understand how things work. Stuff. Maimed for the rest of their life. Trying to raise money for the family. Jared, what are you playing?
which one?
I tell you guys, these next, 8 weeks of class are going to be the hardest ones. Not necessarily for the content, but because it's going to start getting nice out. You guys are going to start getting out.